Hello again, story lovers and storytellers, and welcome back to another episode of Once Upon a Time, the podcast for all your storytelling needs. As usual, I am your co-host, Sarah McGilvray, aka Starshine Wonder on the internet. Now, unfortunately, due to prioritising differences, we've had to replace Zach with a new co-host. Would you like to introduce yourself, sweetheart?
Yes, Andreas is my name. I have about 15 years experience of radio production, and I do a lot of creative different things, among being with my dear fiance on this podcast. It's great to be back in the radio studio again after a 3-year long break.
Yes. Now, today's episode is subtitled A Picture Paints 1,000 Words and is all about art in storytelling and art as a form of storytelling. As such, we have our first ever special guest. Yay! Yeah, I sound so excited about that. Special guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
I have no idea why I've been asked to join this podcast. I'm no one special at all.
Come on, Maddie.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm known as Mad Munchkin online. I have a YouTube channel where I review various animated shows and movies, and I also talk about various issues within the art industry. I am a self-employed concept artist and illustrator, so this is my full-time job. So the subject that we're discussing today, I have a lot to say about it, so I can't wait to get on with it.
Awesome. This is going to be really, really fun. Now, I am going to start with a question.
Dun, dun, dun.
So,
okay.
This is just to kind of get us started and so forth. What impact does artwork and pictures, like in general, have on telling a story, and how much does there need to be artwork within the story, or does there, excuse me, or does there need to be like some artwork or no artwork, or what do people think on this?
Who's going first? Me, I guess.
I can go first if you want, and then you guys can follow on. Personally,
Yeah,
sure. Personally, I think that artwork can add to a story, but I always like that balance of enough artwork that you can just about kind of get an idea of where the story's going, but not so much artwork that is especially for older children and adults, and like not so much artwork that you can basically just show the pictures and and have the story just out there for you. For younger kids, that's a really good way of looking at things. But for like older children into adulthood, for me, as somebody who's done at least some work with children, it's a good idea to try and stimulate their imagination as well as including art within the stories. That makes sense, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Good. What about you, Maddie?
For me, obviously, visual storytelling has been around for a millennia. You know, even from like cave paintings and things like that. You know, they didn't necessarily tell an obvious story, but it marked a moment in history when, you know, the human race learned to convey a moment in an image. And, you know, this is something that has obviously been developed into something so ridiculously sophisticated today that it's kind of the backbone of the human race, I guess, in a way. And especially when it comes to storytelling, going back to when you were a kid, most kids will probably know who Dr. Seuss is, but they think. Sorry, there's bad echo.
Oh, sorry. For viewers at home, I haven't managed to find my headphones, so there might be a little bit of an echo.
So most people, when they were kids, they'll probably know who Dr. Seuss is, but they won't necessarily think of the stories themselves. They might think of the actual visuals that went along with them, that Dr. Seuss illustrated himself. And most of it, it's very fluid in its structure. The color palette is very limited down to just reds and blues and whites, and that's what people think of when they think of Dr. Seuss. Maybe not nowadays. Most people our age, anyway, will probably think of the animated movies or even the live action movies. The 1850s Chuck Jones version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and even Horton Hears Who. And they can't really segregate the visuals from the actual story itself. And another good example would be the Roald Dahl books. And, the illustrator for those was an artist called Quentin Blake. And, for me...
I was going to say he has actually, Quentin Blake's actually done stories with other people as well. And the artwork for him is very, very similar and, well, obviously. But he's most well known for his Roald Dahl stuff. And I always loved effectively just the images that are just there. It's like the BFG being so ridiculously tall, but then you've got the other giants, and they're just scary, but definitely interesting. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah. The reason why I could bring up those two different artists is that their style in how they tell stories is completely different. Dr. Seuss is very polished and it's very, like I said a minute ago, fluid. Whereas when you look at Quentin Blake's illustrations, they're very scratchy and they're quite violent as well in a way. And not, I don't mean in a gory sense. I just mean in how it's very much like it looks like he's practically stabbing the paper as he's drawing, and I love that it's a bit splatty here and there, it's a bit messy, and it's just really interesting for me to compare the two, because they might not necessarily influence 100% how you imagine the story, but it helps to convey the tone of the story more than the actual narrative itself.
Definitely.
So, and even just with Quentin Blake's illustrations, they're not throughout the story like they are in Dr. Seuss books. It's just every few pages here and there, but that might be because those books are kind of aimed toward older children than Dr. Seuss books, obviously, but it's just an interesting example to me. So
I rather like that example. Yeah. Sweetheart, what about you?
I have reviewed some adult comic books. I have a background as a professional reviewer, and one of the more interesting ones was a book named The Red Winter, about a woman living in a town in the north of Sweden during post 68. Time. She falls in love with a guy active in one of the many communist groups at that time. And I find that illustrator's art style quite interesting because it's mainly lines. So you can see the line build up in the picture. But I also must mention the Adrian Plas book that I have. The volume actually has small doodles in it.
Yes, yes. For those of you who don't know, Adrian Plass is a Christian author. He's written various books, including The Diary of Adrian Plass, aged 43 and something.
3/4, I think.
Yes. 43 and a quarter or something like that. The title's designed to be a rip-off of, is designed to be a parody on the,
Bridget
there was
Jones.
another one.
Adrian
There was
Mole.
Yeah, that one. For somebody who reads a lot, I forget names at times, which is kind of annoying, but still. Yeah. Sorry, you were saying, sweetheart.
And I think that illustration also plays an important role. For example, you have the Doré Bible. If you know the illustrator Gustave Doré,
I don't.
he made woodcut images of biblical scenes.
Nice.
Yeah.
That must be something to look at.
You can imagine what a time-consuming work it was to carve those pictures in the wood.
I'll bet. That must have been quite a while. Just to remind with the question, sweetheart, what impact do you think that artwork and pictures in general have on telling a story? And do you think there needs to be like a balance between the artwork and the, or does there not need to be any artwork, or what do you think?
Wait a tad. I am coming from a more graphic design point of view, which I think is very interesting with how they typograph a book, for example, and how well a book is designed to pop in the shelves. One of the more interesting ones that I found is Douglas Coupland Microserves, which is a novel about, or a book about employees at Microsoft in the biggest IT craze of the 90s. And I think the way that they work with design today is very interesting. And how to make books appealing, revealing parts of the story, for example. One of the coolest crime novel covers I've seen was just a free-floating diver.
That must have been different.
Yeah, the thing was that the book starts with a dead diver in a lime quarry on Gotland.
For reference, Andreas's parents live on Gotland.
Gotland is an island in the middle of the Baltic Sea.
It's very pretty.
Yeah.
Just as an aside.
But I also think that art has a role of portraying the story and the text. For example, if you look like cookbooks that I used to review a lot, many of them uses the art to tell what the dishes look like. If you look, and this is a development you can see, for if you look, for example, at Julia Child's Bible on the French kitchen, which is a brick, basically. I have it in my shelf here. I'm looking at it. It's very sparse. So it's just in recent years, if you look at about 80s, the pictures start to come into cookbooks. Before that, cookbooks were just text.
Yes.
So I think definitely art has a role to play. in the telling of a story and if a customer wants to buy a book or not.
Definitely. I mean, one of the there's a couple of books that I've got at home by an author called Rosanna Panzino. If anybody's not heard of her, she does a cooking channel on her channel called Nerdy Nummies, where she bakes like geeky themed treats, and she's been branching out a lot more this year. And so I happen to have two books on, well, one of them's on the shelf, the other one I think is near the shelf. I have a lot of books, and she's deliberately included pictures because, as she said in her first one, she's dyslexic, so she likes to have the visual aid of you have the text and then you have the picture that goes with the text to show you exactly what you're supposed to be doing, which definitely helps. Things like animation and art has always been a very visual medium. Do you think that art in and of itself can contribute to the person's imagination when they're reading the story?
For me, bringing up examples, as Andreas was talking, I was thinking of illustrators that did some of my favourite books, and the one that came up in my head first was Josh Kirby. And he is probably most well known for illustrating the front covers of the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett.
Wow.
And, you know, if people are familiar with those books, the covers on these books are so meticulous, and you know they're very heavily inspired by Bosch paintings. If you don't know who that is, you can look them up. Maybe we can add in the description below or something on all the stuff that we've been talking about. And without that kind of art on the front, I wouldn't necessarily play out the entire story in that style, but it was the art on the covers of these books that enticed me into starting reading them.
Yeah.
And, you know, another good example would be Alan Lee. And, you know, I think most people would know who this person is if they're following illustration at all. Probably best well known for illustrating the Hobbit books and the Lord of the Rings books. He was also one of the production designers in the films. So, you know, even the films themselves, they look just like his illustrations sometimes. And that's, you know, it's, for me, it's sometimes having these kind of really complicated and they're still dreamlike, but they're based on reality, so there's still a lot of believability in them, and that for me helps to absorb the story more, because you're going back to these illustrations and it's not, you're not necessarily, like I've just said, it's not like the art is completely overlining your imagination, but it's adding to it, but still being subtle enough with it to allow you to paint your own picture in your mind, which for me is very important. When I read a story, I want to be too rigid in how I picture something, you know. It's for me, although you know, it's like the line from the Disney film Beauty and the Beast, how can you read this? There's no pictures. And Val says, well, some people prefer to use their imagination. And for me, I'm somewhere in the middle. I like having the art there, you know, and I can still use my imagination as well, or even be inspired to make my own art based on the stories I read, you know. So for me, it's a kind of like a middle ground, I guess, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
I have an example there. I did a school task to read Dante's Divina Commedia when I was about 17, 18-ish. And pictures, I when I read that book and wrote this paper, I always had a pen, an art pen by my side to sketch what came up in my head.
That's actually a really cool idea. For me, it's like you mentioned about how can you read something? There's no pictures in here. That reminds me very much of the story of Alice in Wonderland, because obviously Alice, when Alice was reading, it starts out that the book she's reading, she's rather bored of it because there's no pictures in it and there's nothing really to entertain her, and it's all long words, and then suddenly she sees a rabbit, and then the story, and then the story proper begins, and it's very much one of those rather odd but very, very well known and quite surreal tales. There's some really, really good books that I love for the imagination. But one of the later episodes that I'm hoping to do with another guest, as long as he actually says yes, and even if he doesn't say yes, I'm going to do the episode anyway, is about adaptations and about adapting the story from the books into film and or television. And I always think and I always remember things like you take a look at the story. For example, the Harry Potter books. I have read all 7 of the Harry Potter books, plus 3 of the kind of supplement books, and the art covers are fantastic. The writing is well done enough that you can actually picture it in your head, and then they went and tried to make it all into films, and one
of the mistakes they made there was sorry to interrupt,
That's fine.
the Harry Potter books, and the artist that illustrated the Harry Potter books was someone called Jim Kay. And as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong about this, but Jim Kay was not involved in the production design of the films. So that's why the films, in the visual language anyway, did not feel like the books did. But for me, when translating something from books to film, I feel that it's actually important for the films to have their own identity. So sometimes, they don't involve the original illustrator for whatever reason. Like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, that's completely different because they're a lot more meaty than Harry Potter is. But Harry Potter can get away with stepping away from the original illustrations more. I guess. Because you brought up Alice in Wonderland, that made me think of Mary Blair. And Mary Blair, for those that don't know, was the artist behind Disney's Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Song of the South, and Cinderella. And it's not really conveyed in Alice in Wonderland as well as it was in Cinderella, but her style, it's very she's much more of a graphic designer than a illustrator or an artist. She's also the artist that helped to design the look of the It's a Small World ride in the Disney parks. And it's just because you brought up Alice in Wonderland, that the dreamlike scenes in that film, it's a little bit surreal, but it's still very simple, and it just makes the films a lot more memorable that way.
If I get to talk, when I read The Lord of the Rings, there was a Swedish artist named Bo Hansson. He wrote a whole album, music for The Lord of the Rings. So I had his tracks going in my head and listened over and over again. And this record is still a bestseller in the US. 50 years since it was released.
Wow.
they locked themselves up in a summer cottage in the archipelago of Stockholm to record it for half a year and read Lord of the Rings and record the album. And
That's some dedication.
And the same artist also did an album about the long journey, Al Aharaira, Watership Down. He's very interesting. But I also, because I had myself an early copy of Harry Potter in English, which had a completely different cover style than the later books.
Mm.
I don't know where that copy is at the moment. I think it's in my boxes that I took when my parents cleaned out storage last year.
Fair enough.
It's in my boxes. It was one of those things that I packed down and I haven't gone through.
That's fair enough.
So, but I also think, how can you work with storytelling to tell an animated story? Because I know, Maddie, that you do some sort of cartoonish YouTube show.
That's one way to put it.
I have avatars that I use on my YouTube channel, and they're characters that represent me because I don't want to be on camera when I'm talking about stuff. So I'll have a character as a stand-in, and the character is called Mad Munchkin, and she's a very like impish-like character, I guess would be the best way to describe her, without going into too much detail. And she is she's basically me, but a more exaggerated version of me.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to kind of express myself in a more fluidic way where I'm not being held back by, oh, what do I look like when I talk about this stuff? Because I get really excited and animated. I talk with my hands a lot, and it's having an avatar there instead takes away that anxiety, I suppose. So for me, having that, well, that's artwork in itself, having that there, it kind of is a form of protection for me, I guess, as well as a form of expression. So that's why art is so important to me, because it is kind of like a shield. So I use it as a bit of a defense, really, sometimes, which is why I get so obsessed with it.
So, just on a side note, if Mad Munchkin is supposed to be you, who's Berry Sue?
For those that don't know, there's another character in my YouTube channel that I use periodically, and it's the character called Mary Sue. And she was drawn up as a one-off joke character in a video that I made years ago when talking about alicorn original characters that people in the My Little Pony community make. And before I did that character, Maddie didn't have anyone else to bounce off of. So it was basically me talking to the viewer about stuff. Whereas when Mary was there, Maddie had someone to argue with. And that suddenly made the video so much more fun to write. And it also gave Maddie so much character development, and more of her personality came forth. So now, although Maddie is basically me, I mean it in a way that I'm able to be me through her. I don't mean that she is literally me. I don't refer to myself as Maddie outside of cons at all. Or, it's, how I talk, this voice, I don't change it when I'm being Maddie. It might be a little bit lower, and I might take my time more in enunciating certain words, because I'm recording for a video.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of doing more of, it's not really voice acting, because I'm not really emoting that much when it comes to Maddie, unless she's arguing with Mary. But with Mary, that is definitely more. I like to think of Mary as representing the side of me that's more spontaneous and is much more childlike and a little bit sadistic as well. So so with I guess the way that I like to describe them both is Maddie represents the more calculative side of creativity, or the creative process. You take your time with it. You're disciplined. You've trained yourself how to do certain things certain ways. But with Mary, she has more fun with it. She's able to break the rules more, and she in herself is the one-off joke that turned into the running gag. So
Yep.
yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, that's how I like to describe them.
Yes.
And they are very much, they're not literally just two sides of me. They each, obviously, I've poured a lot of myself into both of these characters, but at the same time, because they've been around so long, they have grown into their own characters as well. They have their own rules. They have likes and dislikes. They have character flaws. They're not perfect, even though Mary likes to think she is. But I think in a way, Maddie would like to be more like Mary, and Mary would like to be more like Maddie. So I like having that balance there. It's like the classic duo act. It's the two characters in a duo are never exactly the same ever.
Yeah.
Because that would be really boring and not balanced. So you've got Laurel and Hardy, or Morecambe and Wise, or Glinda and Alphaba from Wicked, or Thelma and Louise, or all these classic duo characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sam and Max.
Sam and Max, yeah.
Yeah, just would like that reference, but that's beside the point. No, it's all about, with that, it's all about being it's kind of two halves of the same coin kind of thing.
Kind of, a little bit, yeah, but it's not black and white either.
No, it never is. It's one of those things of, with the dawn of animation, because let's be honest, and I'm going to be talking about this in another episode because this is more to do with movies and stuff, but cinema and film and animation, animation as in actual moving animation or stop motion animation or any kind of animation like that, as opposed to like comic books and so forth, hasn't actually been around that long. It's been around probably a few hundred years, which in terms of the fact that art, as in drawing, painting, I'm using this in the context of like drawing, painting, creating artwork, has been around for millennia. And so animation's one of those interesting things that it's not it's almost like this little thing that's happened as different things get produced, like film and television and things like stop motion and stuff like that, and getting bigger and bigger to the point that one of the other episodes I'm hoping to do is about Disney. Literally just about how Disney has taken over the world.
Can I please be part of that pod?
Yeah. And
I also have
sorry, go ahead, sweetheart.
I also have a very interesting Swedish illustrator named Jan Löv. And he has a very interesting art style, because he mixes in a ton of pop culture in his drawings, and he's done several kids' books.
Okay.
And one of them was my favorite because it came out the year I turned 7. Named Ernie's Cars. And his pictures are a myriad of things. I will show you when you're over, sweetheart.
Okay. In case you guys haven't guessed yet, myself and I know that Andrea said it at the beginning, but to clarify, we are Andreas is my fiance. In addition to having experience with audio engineering and how to run a radio show and all this lovely kind of stuff that just it's wonderful, and you can't tell that I like him, can you?
And I also came to think about another thing, Amy, when you were talking about Mad Munchkin and Mary Sue, that I can recognize this myself in my artist being as I'm releasing music under a different name. Like Andy Plank has his own life now after releasing music for almost 15 years.
Wow.
Under that name, next year it's 15 years of Andy Plank.
That's quite a while. I never realised.
So, I mean, that character has grown to his own way, but it's, at my way of seeing it, it's a more extreme side of me, because Andy Plank is, you know me as a quite introvert guy. Right, sweetheart?
Yes. Yes, definitely.
But Andy Plank is the opposite, and he's a bit more androgenic as well.
Nice.
Which is influenced by David Bowie, which is an amazing artist, I must say. And he also done marvelous paintings. What many people didn't know was that he also painted, not just music, but art.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. You learn something new every day, they say.
Yeah.
It's fun.
And what I also think is that art has also been an important tool in the piece of storytelling. Not just in kids' books, but in adults' books as well. Especially as in Sweden in the 18th, 19th century, we had something named when the priest came out to the villages to basically make sure that the citizens knew their biblical history. So people made songs to learn the biblical history.
There's definitely overlap with art and music and books and creativity. Actually, that might be a good subject to talk about at some point.
I also came to think about that art has been used as a way to make a joke with the mighty people. For example, I have a 15th century painting where there is the blood from Jesus on the cross is spraying on Martin Luther's head.
Okay.
I don't remember the name of the artist in my head at the moment. I mean, art has always been a tool for storytellers to trade down their histories.
Definitely.
In the notes you had interactive storytelling. What were you meaning by that?
Interactive stories where, like, I think I must have meant the, like the choose your own adventure books.
Yeah.
Yes. And the fact that nowadays you can get them online, and there's normally like artwork that can accompany them. Or or for example, like role playing or going on a like LARPing session or something like that, where you're telling the story as you go along and you're the ones creating the story. Having like a frame of reference for, say, artwork or like even fan drawings or fan painting, the stuff is always quite interesting. You're getting the chance to actually not just kind of take part in the story, not just watch the story, but actually you get to take part in it, which can be quite incredible.
I also think of computer games like the Myst series, Loom, LucasArts, Sierra, the early 90s multimedia adventures.
Yeah. There's also, obviously, video games have become like this massive visual spectacle. I've just been watching Josh Scorcher. For those of you who haven't heard of him, he's a YouTuber who also does like brony stuff, but he's also a very, very big gamer, and he had quite a big gamer following before he became a brony. But he's been playing Kingdom Hearts 3, and I've watched some of it, mostly because he was streaming when I woke up, which is, given that he's in America, means that he was up till like 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, you're being crazy, Josh, but never mind. But the cutscenes and the visuals that you get are absolutely stunning. And video games have come a long way from text adventures like Zork, which I never actually played, but apparently was like a massive thing back in the day.
I must also mention MUDs, multi-user dungeons, which was even before Zork.
Seriously?
Yep. I have friends who played MUDs on the university's ginormous calculation computer here in Uppsala in the 80s.
You weren't born in the 80s. Well, you were born at the end of the 80s.
But I know people that are like 20 years older than me that grew up in this city. And he sneaked into the computer central. He was like maybe 15, 16 and started playing around with terminal and stuff. That was when all you had was a command line. It has gone so far that I even have a DOS box installation on my computer when I get tired of Win 10's graphical lull.
Always interesting. You were going to say something, Maddie.
Oh, no, it's okay. It was just because you brought up Josh Scorcher, and I had a funny story about him.
Oh.
Go on.
Tell us.
Okay. Well, Josh Scorcher, I watched his gaming channel, and this is about 5 years ago. Started talking. No, didn't start talking. It was I started watching his gaming stuff, and then around that time I got into My Little Pony and discovered like other YouTubers that did MLP related content, and one of them was Dr. Wolf, and I started watching his stuff, and then he started watching my stuff, and we got talking. We decided to start talking on Skype because we're very similar in tone with our content, and that was back when the fandom was still kind of in its infancy, and I was looking for more YouTubers that did MLP content. So we were in a Skype call, and Doc says, "Oh, one moment, I'll bring in my friend Josh, who also makes MLP content." And I'm like, "Okay." And I see the icon beside his name, and I think, "Oh, that's the same icon as Josh Scorcher on YouTube. That's interesting." Not realizing it was the same person. So I didn't realize until the day after that I spent an hour talking to, at the time, one of my favorite YouTubers. But because we weren't actually discussing games, we were discussing MLP content, and I just thought that was a really funny story. That's how I met Josh Scorcher. I didn't actually realize it was Josh Scorcher. So
yeah.
That reminds me of how we met.
Yeah.
May I?
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
thanks. Okay, so myself and Maddie met about 3 years ago. It's
Approximately.
3 or 4 years ago by now.
I think it's
No, it's kind of 3.5-ish. When I moved into the flat that I'm living in at the moment, which come next year I'm not going to be living in it, but that's beside the point right now. I had just discovered My Little Pony and got involved with the fandom and found that it was full of amazing people and everybody was really positive and nice, and I felt really kind of awesome and special that I was in this what I considered to be quite a cool fandom. Although some people would beg to differ, but that's beside the point. I found out about this convention called UK PonyCon, which that year was going to be somewhere up north that I can't remember for the life of me.
It was in Leeds.
Oh, this is the year before. This is the one that I didn't get to go to because I'd literally just moved in here and didn't really have enough money or time or energy to try and organize time off and everything else. But I was like, I really want to go next year. So when they announced that it was going to be in Leeds and it was going to be in October, I was like, sign me up, and paid for the hotel and paid for the fare up and paid for going to the convention, and automatically, being me, offered to signed up for volunteering, which that year was fantastically awesome.
Yes.
Maddie, under her actual name, posts a message up on the Facebook group saying that she's coming down, that she's vending. She's coming down from Scotland and she's looking for people to meet up with her when she gets to Leeds. Being me, bearing in mind I know of Mad Munchkin at this point, but haven't quite put two and two together, I say, "Oh, I'm coming up by train from Bath. Where are you coming from? Scotland. Oh, I'll meet up with you at the bus. This is all." And then somebody posts, "Oh, Mad Munchkin, you're coming." I just said yes to meeting up with Mad Munchkin to make sure she's okay. At this point, I fangirl. And then go and tell her that I fangirled, which she gets a laugh out of because at this point I've realised that actually Maddie's a human being. Well, Maddie isn't, but you will. Yes. Anyway, and it was just like, oh, I actually have a picture that she did of Spike the Dragon that's up on, which is a really nice picture.
Yeah. I agree. That's one we have to have in our flat.
Definitely. We will stick it somewhere.
We'll frame it, sweetheart.
Which is my story of how I met Mad Munchkin.
And you turned up at the bus station with cake, so I was like, well, she's luring me in with friendship with cake. So yeah, that was a good weekend. That was good fun.
Yes, it was. That was the year before I met you, sweetheart.
Well, we had started to gotten to know each other later in that year.
Yeah.
We became friends on Facebook in like December.
Yes. And this was just before that. So I've been friends with Maddie for about 4-ish years, and I can safely say that she's one of the coolest friends she's one of the coolest friends to have, and not just because she happens to be horse famous.
Oh, I hate that phrase. Oh,
sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Yes, we have gone completely and utterly off topic. Anyway, it is about 9:30 now.
Yeah.
And I am very conscious that my dear darling Andreas probably needs to head to bed in a bit because it's because he's in Sweden and it's an hour ahead.
Stop it.
Sorry.
The course starts at 9 tomorrow.
Oh, okay. That's my mistake.
So it's okay. But I
Sorry,
think we'll better
sweetheart.
finish recording quite soon because my computer is to not be too long either for the editing purposes of this.
It's a good idea. Anyway, thank you for joining us all tonight. Maddie,
Yeah.
it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you
Yeah.
for inviting me.
That is not a problem.
It was
I
an
hope you.
absolute honor to have you on
Yes.
our show.
Oh.
Yes. I hope you will come. I hope we will come back again, and we can talk about other random stuff about storytelling and
Sure.
stuff like that.
When you did say earlier in the podcast that you were going to be doing one on Disney.
Yes.
Kind of a self-proclaimed Disney
Fanatic?
Yes, so I would love to join that if possible.
That is not a problem. I will definitely contact you about that. For those of you who haven't, who aren't subscribed to Maddie's channel, go and do that. She is awesome and does wonderful reviews about not just My Little Pony, but also about animation and about like she said, stuff within the art world and stuff like that. We are going to post all her links, including her Etsy shop and Google.
I don't have the Etsy shop. I don't have the Etsy shop anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, we're going to post all her links. We'll post all her links in the description. Go and check her out. She's a seriously good artist and completely and utterly worth your time. And yes, I know I'm advertising you. I'm allowed to. It's my show, our show.
Yeah.
I appreciate it anyway.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yes. So please do go and check her out. And as always, and next month, we hope you will join us for our first ever author interview, which will be with Rachel Dahl, who has written the Alonthiel Chronicles. Go and check them out. Go and buy them. Go and show her some love as well, because her books are seriously good and we will be spoiling them massively next time.
And maybe
Bye!
Bye.
Bye.